Hello and welcome to the Guardian Film Show. The times they are a-changin', and Zan Ramblin' Brooks and Henry Hobo Barnes have jumped a freight train and gone to Utah for the Sundance Film Festival. It ain't me, babe, I said when they asked who was going to host this week's show, but that answer, my friend, was blowing in the wind. Falling like a hard rain on this week's show, Julia Roberts chews the scenery and Meryl Streep vomits it all up over the floor in a film version of the acclaimed play August, Osage County. Jon Savage gets his kicks with Teenage, a documentary version of his book about the rise of the adolescent. And Kenneth Branagh goes full oligarch as the evil Russian who can only be stopped by CIA hero Jack Ryan in a reboot of the Tom Clancy thrillers. But we start with Inside Llewyn Davies, the 17th film from Joel and Ethan Coen. This one is set in Greenwich Village, New York in the harsh winter of 1960. Our hero's got a guitar, he's strumming out folk songs in the Gaslight Club. But he's not, it seems, destined to be Dylan. He's destined to be a Coen brothers character, fed through the ringer and hung out to dry.
Do you ever think about the future at all?
The future? You mean like flying cars? Hotels on the moon? Tang?
And this is why you're fucked?
No, it's why you're fucked. You're just trying to blueprint a future. Move to the suburbs with Jim. Have kids.
That's bad.
If that's what music is for you, a way to get to that place, then yeah, it's a little careerist. And it's a little square.
Poor Llewyn Davies. He's homeless, he's penniless, he's nearly hopeless. His musical partner killed himself, he's got his friend's wife pregnant, and now he's saddled with a cat. Won't someone just cut him a break?
Oh, God damn it, I am one lucky bastard. Thanks for suggesting this place. Poor thing couldn't have eaten since yesterday. It's a damn house cat. Here you go.
I'm joined by the Guardian film critic Peter Bradshaw and a Guardian head of culture, Caspar Llewellyn-Smith. Peter, you loved this one at Cannes.
Yes.
Did you still like it when you saw it again?
Yes, even more so, if that's possible. When I first saw it, I was instantly absorbed into it, and I wondered, where are we going with this extraordinary character? On the second time, I thought, well, I know where we're going with him, but I found it even more gripping and engrossing, and his situation seemed to be more tragic this time as this artist, somebody who is genuinely committed to art, to his artistry. He's a very serious and high-minded character, but also somebody who is only human and who, like the rest of us, can only take so many knockbacks and is making this terrible decision, should I just abandon my vocation? And I found that absolutely fascinating. It's something which is very rarely discussed in any discourse about art, is what happens when an artist simply can't carry on. And that makes it sound very gloomy and grim. And it is a bit gloomy, but it's also fantastically funny and sweet and charming. And Oscar Isaac seems to have appeared out of nowhere as this incredible character. I thought he was absolutely great.
Although he's been going years.
Yeah, I know.
It
It feels like he's a sort of overnight turn who's taken years to arrive, but he's absolutely brilliant in this role. Apparently he sings a lot of his own material himself. The music is just brilliant in it. I'm not a big folk music fan. I know next to nothing about it, but I found myself converted to the absolute innocence of this music. It seems to combine innocence with experience. It seems to combine a certain kind of almost childlike innocence with an absolute aged exhaustion and sense of being very, very old and just accepting the world, this fallen world, as it is.
Caspar, you probably know more about the music. Did it ring true for you?
Thanks for having me on in the first place. It's by virtue of my surname sounding a little bit like the title of this film, which gives me the credentials to be here. But actually, this whole period is something I'm really interested in, and I'm a big Bob Dylan fan. And Dylan made a lot of recordings or hung out at the Gaslight Cafe, and in the movie you have the Gaslight Cafe kind of lovingly recreated. So for me it was a kind of great return to that scene and a sense of the period detail I thought was terrific, but at the same time it sort of strips it of the myth slightly. I mean, what I liked about it was the reality, and as you suggest, Peter, you see the kind of hard knocks. It's not this great romantic setup. It's sort of rather dispiriting and slightly depressing. The bit about the singing, though, the performances, I mean, the thing I think is terrific is that it's neither terrible, it's not that he's a bad singer, and that's why he's not successful.
That's what's
but
so
it's not
fascinating,
so fantastic either, and it's slightly giving this away, but at the end, Bob Dylan is introduced at the end of this, and of course Bob Dylan was the person who took that scene and took it on to the next level and brought it to sort of worldwide fame.
But for me that was actually a bit of a fault with the film, is that the whole point about Llewyn Davies is that he's not quite got it.
Yes.
And for me the sort of character, it's a real kind of reaction shot character. You know, he's at his best when he's, for instance, the great scene where they take the Please Mr. Kennedy song, which is this sort of fluffy pop song which is going to actually be a novelty hit, and he says to Justin Timberlake's character, who wrote this? And Justin Timberlake says, well, I did, and he has to sort of, you know, acknowledge that, and all he does is sort of reaction shots, and for me that didn't make him the most kind of kinetic or lovable or even interesting character.
I have to say I don't agree. I like that moment because you saw the awful dying inside moment in his head. You thought, oh my God, I've just offended him. He's just got me this gig. Now I'm just going to have to swallow hard and eat this ridiculous song. And what I loved about it, of course, was the song, apparently composed by T-Bone Burnett. Of course, it's so brilliant. I mean, it's a fantastic song. It's boiling over with success and optimism and the future, heading to the stars, heading to space. Whereas Llewyn Davies is so miserable and Eeyore-ish and kind of half in love with his own failure, and the comparison between the two is just so piquant. I just loved it.
But isn't that song, I thought it was like taken from, isn't it spun from some thing from the time?
Well, there's a sense that they're the Peter, Paul and Mary, Justin Timberlake and the other person in the band. So there are all these resonances, and it's sort of almost completely biographical, but not quite. And I like that sort of slippage between the two worlds.
Yes, I love the Peter, Paul and Mary thing. The ironic,
true.
satiric version of Peter, Paul and Mary. I thought that was great. That's something, little as I know about folk music, I did pick up on that, actually.
And very true to the time, that whole dynamic between idealism and we're forging this brave new world, and we're out here marching for people's rights, and actually real life biting quite hard, and the cynicism and you know, reality hits in quite a hard way, and I loved all of that.
Explain the cat.
Yeah, sorry. It's the Gorfines cat. I crashed there last night.
What's its name?
I don't know. He snuck out the door.
Do you think you're staying here tonight?
Leaving. Oh. I was hoping to. Is Jim around?
Jim's not here. We told Troy he could crash here.
Troy Nelson, how are you?
How you doing? Llewyn Davies.
Oh, hello. I've heard your music. And heard many nice things about you from Jim and Jean and from others.
You have not heard one nice thing about me from Jean. Ever.
Llewyn Davies there, asking us to hang him, then plodding to the shop to buy us some rope. Next up, more music, courtesy of pop historian Jon Savage, whose book about teenagers has been made into a documentary. Andrew Pulver hauled young Savage in and made him explain himself.
We are teenagers, but we didn't always exist.
First, we were just children. And then all of a sudden, we were supposed to be adults.
In the early years of the 20th century, this new stage of life was defined between childhood and adulthood. And that stage of life was initially called adolescence by G. Stanley Hall, an American psychologist, and defined as being between the ages 13 to 24. And this separate stage of life, having been defined, caused problems. It caused problems for adults and governments, and so it had to be controlled, either by groups like the Boy Scouts or by overt militarism putting these kids into the army, or for actual real-time adolescents who, having been defined as a separate stage of life, began to think, well, how is this going to work for us? What are the potentials of this? If we're different, if we're something between childhood and adulthood, what are we? What could we be?
Our teachers and our parents didn't understand us, so we created our own world. Whether they called us hooligans, flappers, jitterbugs, or sub-debs, we knew who we were.
Caspar, presumably you know Jon Savage's work very, very well. Is he more compelling as a filmmaker or as an essayist, do you think?
I know his work, and I've got to declare an interest. I know Jon as well, and he's written for me over the years, period of time, so I will come to this with a certain amount of bias. What I liked about this film, and I really enjoyed it, is that it works as a terrific complement to his book, Teenage, which is a pretty hefty tome and a pretty serious work, the result of him studying this subject for sort of 30 years or something. Quite rigorous and quite academic almost, although it's also a terrific read. Whereas the film has this sort of dreamlike quality and isn't particularly rigorous. And you put those two things together and they complement each other really well. And for people like me who love pop culture and are interested in the history, just seeing all this archival footage I thought was just a delight.
It did seem quite dreamlike to me. It did seem quite almost ambient and almost sort of slightly woozy and like a bit like a sort of advert for teenage life, like for American Apparel version of it at its sort of most woozy. I mean, I don't remember my teenage years being that exciting. Were yours, Peter?
No, not at all. That's my sort of reservation. I have a couple of reservations about this. I did enjoy it very much, and I felt I learned from it as well, because the idea that the teenager is a recent, historically constituted invention, that's a familiar idea. But what Jon Savage and Matt Wolfe do is show you how that came to be with the Industrial Revolution, mass conscription and youth movements, how young people came to think of themselves in this tribal way. And I thought that was very interesting. I think it could have said more about the boring side of being a teenager, the depressing side of being stuck in your bedroom for long periods of time. And that is, I suspect, most people's experience of being a teenager. What this film does, it has faux footage, mock footage, and that works reasonably well. What it does is it's there to dramatise the stage readings of teenage diarists of the time, and it works perfectly well. But I think there is an issue emerging generally of unsignposted mock Super 8 footage, which is
a big thing now, isn't it?
Which I think is in danger of undermining the authenticity and the good faith of films. I mean, I think this film just about steers clear of it, but I did get the impression that it didn't need those mock films. I think it would have been better if it had just used real footage and real footage only.
I found it slightly disquieting. I mean, there's amazing shots suddenly of someone called Brenda Dean Poole, who was a member of the Bright Young Things, and a fascinating character. I mean, terrifically interesting figure who ended up being a junkie and dying young. And you see it and you think, my God, where have they got this from, this colour footage of her? And when you realise that it's been invented, it's sort of slightly off-putting. And I think at its worse, it feels to me a bit like a sort of Lana Del Rey pop video, which is this highly stylised retreat into that sort of world. But at its best, it felt to me, this film, like an Adam Curtis documentary without the slightly annoying overwrought bits of an Adam Curtis documentary. I mean, don't get me wrong, I find some of that stuff very nourishing and interesting and engaging, but sometimes trying a bit too hard.
You see, for me, it felt like a poor man's Adam Curtis documentary. Absolutely, that's fundamentally what it felt like. Because, it didn't sort of, it had an essay that was taken from a book, and it had interesting footage, but it didn't have a really interesting new idea that it was, positing through it, and it, it had the sort of experimentalism, but it didn't have real innovation. I mean, is it a film that people of our age would like, or is it a film that teenagers themselves would like now? I
think people would like. I mean, I think what's interesting about it is that when we talk about our teenage years, it's always coloured with a kind of self-deprecation and irony, and oh, weren't we all awful, and weren't we so stupid and naff and lame in our teenage years? And of course we were. But what I find interesting about this is that it doesn't do it like that. It's about the prehistory of being a teenager. It's investigating the foundations of what we think of as our teenage years.
Do you think teenagers would like it, Caspar? Is it a film for the kids?
Well, I think there's an interesting point that we're sort of all teenagers now. We're all interested in pop culture, and I think you get into very interesting thorny areas if you were to bring it right up to date.
Yes.
There's a whole world of grown up very familiar with all the tropes of pop culture. Actual teenagers, it's a really hard time for them. And there's a very good piece by Jon Savage on the Guardian website about the dismal state of being a teenager at the moment and how tough it is. It would be interesting to take that film and solicit the reactions of that age group, I think.
Because as we know, being a teenager is
inspiring or slightly depressing, that things are, did actually look quite glamorous and exciting, and it's a bit miserable now.
A lot of people try to shape the future, but it's the young ones who will live in it.
Now smarten yourself up and run a comb through your hair, because we're off to the theatre for an audience with August Osage County, the film version of Tracy Letts' Pulitzer Prize-winning play. When Letts picked up a Tony Award on Broadway for the play of this, he thanked the producers for sticking with proper theatre actors. This movie version replaces them all with film stars. Thank God for that.
So, I'm curious, when you say you don't eat meat, you mean you don't eat meat of any kind?
Right.
Sure. Is that for health reasons, or?
Well, when you eat meat, you ingest an animal's fear.
Ingest what? Its fur?
Fear. Oh, jeez.
How do you do that?
August Osage County serves us up a bubbling family stew, then scatters Meryl Streep going cold turkey over the broth like croutons. Secrets will out, tempers will fray, and remember, there's no interval in this one.
You mean I've been eating fear, what, 3 times a day for 60 years?
Right. This one won't have a meal. It doesn't have meat in it.
Peter, flash back to last September, and this was one of the films that was 100% going to clean up at the Oscars this year. Why is it not likely to?
I think it's because if people shared my view of it, that it is a very, very classy confection of actors, whatever the American version of Loveyism is, all of them going all out for their clip reel kind of moment. And I found it very, very unsatisfying as a movie. It's got one great scene where Meryl Streep, as the cantankerous old grandma, harangues them all over dinner. And that's a great moment. Again, it's her sort of Oscar clip moment. But the rest of it, frankly, is just very supercilious. I found Julia Roberts as the daughter unbearably mannered and supercilious.
But she's got an Oscar nomination along with Meryl Streep.
I found it just boring. And,
it's very long.
And the awful thing is that even the greatest actors can have an off day, and at last Benedict Cumberbatch has arrived. His off day has, I'm afraid, arrived, because his performance as the little Charlie, whatever the phrase is, I found it pretty under par, really. It's not, I don't think it's his fault, it's the whole movie is kind of whinging and passive-aggressive, and I found it completely a real turn-off, to be honest with you, no.
It is very whinging film.
Yeah.
Caspar, did you like it?
Very, very actory, very wordy. I mean, it's just, it's a play, and they've taken the play and they put it onto the screen, and you just think, take all the words out, you know, it just could be cut right down, and you know, it's not the way people talk in real life, it's the way people talk in the theatre or on the stage. You know, some of the writing is terrific, and there are some really powerful scenes, and the eat the catfish bit, you know, fabulous. But it could just be winnowed out, I think. Although the Meryl Streep character, there's a nice circularity here. Terrific term, playing Kate Blanchett when she played Bob Dylan in the film I'm Not There. I mean, it's an absolute dead ringer for it, with the shades on and the hair.
But Tracy Letts Plays have, in fact, made brilliant films. I mean, Bug and then Killer Joe. And I think, for me, that's because William Friedkin is a director who kind of takes a play script and kind of just, you know, burns it.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas
you
the guy,
needed
John
much more
Wells,
slash and burn. This was very respectful, very classy cultural artifact with all these classy names. And it was kind of dinner theatre.
And you can see that even in the staging of it. I mean, you know, there's a conceit that they're in the North Oklahoma plains with this huge countryside, but all the pivotal scenes take place in this very cooped up, very suffocating environment. And sort of that works quite well. But you're kept being told it's so hot. It's supposed to be this incredibly hot month, and they keep telling you this. But then you see the sort of characters wandering around with their dressing gowns on. You think it doesn't look that hot. And that sort of strikes a slightly false note, I thought.
Who are you?
Well, this is my fiancé, Steve. You met him at the church?
Steve Herbebrecht.
Had what?
Herbebrecht.
It's German.
German, Irish, really. I just have
that is peculiar, Karen, to bring a date to your father's funeral. I know the poetry was good, but I really wouldn't have considered it date material.
He's not a date, he's my fiancé, and we're getting married on New Year's in Miami. And I would love it if you could make it.
Well, I don't really see that happening, do you, Steve?
August Osage County there, revealing that suicide leaves scars and funerals are rarely a picnic. We finished this week with more home truths, Homeland Security style, with Jack Ryan, Shadow Recruit, the latest attempt to reboot the Tom Clancy novels. This film is directed by Kenneth Branagh and stars Kenneth Branagh as a megalomaniac Russian and Chris Pine as the clean-cut CIA agent who needs to stop him taking over the world. Earlier this week I sat down with both of them and asked them about patriotism, geopolitics and the impossibility of world peace.
This is quarterback. I have a situation. Somebody tried to kill me.
Classically, Jack Ryan is an American patriot, but I thought that in 2014 it was really interesting to look at what that word meant and how someone who is intelligent and introspective and worldly and cognizant of what's happened in the past, let's say 12 years, how does that affect his relationship with governmental organizations?
Viktor Cherevin is unpredictable.
You Americans like to think of yourselves as direct. Perhaps you are just rude.
Perhaps you're just touchy.
To make a big hero, you need a formidable foe. And so Ken playing essentially a Russian oligarch was a really interesting, I think, created that foe. But what happened is, as you went along, you realized, you know what, he was doing exactly what he thought was the patriotic thing to do.
If they're both patriots and they're both working in the national interest, is there any hope for world peace ever?
Were they to have had this conversation directly, Jack could and should be asking Cherevin, well, surely this version of patriotism is misplaced if love of country also involves hatred and attack on other countries. Surely we need to redefine what patriotism is.
What the hell is going on here? Sometimes the ones closest to us are the ones we should trust the least. We all have our secrets.
Caspar, Kenneth Branagh has said that he was drawn to this one because it's just the kind of film that he'd go and see. That surprised me a bit. Is it the kind of film you'd naturally go and see?
Well, you'd imagine Ken Branagh would want to go and see Osage County with his peer group acting their socks off and being very intense.
I mean, maybe he's being honest, and maybe
it's quite refreshing that the idea Ken wants to sort of see, you know, a big popcorn movie. And he's made a big popcorn movie, but just quite a dull popcorn movie, I thought, and sort of mannered and cliched in all the wrong ways, just a bit by rote, I thought.
Well, it's partly the plot, isn't it? You've got this incredibly boring plot about maintaining currency markets at an appropriate level, which is sort of what it all hangs on.
Yes.
I find that very hard to get that
excited
about.
Yes. And also he's going to blow everything to Kingdom Come as well, just in case we think that's boring. And it's not quite clear why he has to do that at the same time. And then we get this huge kind of finale. During which I almost, tuned out. I'm thinking, what's happening? Is he's driving through the streets on his motorbike? What on earth is happening? To give him this sudden burst of Jason Bourne-style action. It is ridiculous. But I think Kenneth Branagh was drawn by the paycheck, to be quite frank.
But he's earned enough with Thor, and he's got respect, hasn't he? So
he has. I mean, he has. I like Kenneth Branagh. I mean, I've seen Kenneth Branagh go in and out of fashion, and he was once the absolute nadir of fashion, and now he's sort of come back in. And I like Kenneth Branagh. I think he's an interesting man. I very much enjoyed his performance as Laurence Olivier in Marilyn Monroe movie. He's very hammy. He awards himself the Russian villain baddie role, which I was sort of hoping he would do more with, but instead he just does the silly Russian accent and a sort of rat-trap mouth, and it's just very silly.
I thought it was good. I thought it was a throwback to those times when, the villain was more interesting and seductive than the hero, which you used to get in Hitchcock and all that, really. I mean, I thought he was pretty good. There was some fun to be had here, right?
Well, there was some fun to be had, but it feels like lots of different bits cobbled together from every action movie you can ever half remember having seen.
Caspar, I thought there was quite a lot of sort of classy Ken Branagh touches slipped in here. There's allusions to good spy classics, and there's the big painting you mentioned, there's Shakespeare, there's fine wine and poetry. I thought there was quite a lot to tuck into.
There was sort of third-man moments where you suddenly see the Kevin Costner character, who's the shadowy, he's CIA, who is he, what does he do, appears on a park bench in Moscow, and he's got a big shaggy dog with him, and you sort of think, well, that's a bit where Ken's thought, I know what I'm doing here.
Ken's got dogs.
I'll put some slightly quirky thing about his character in. But no, it just felt to me like a sequence of sort of rather familiar cliches, not really kind of witty reminders of the classic moments in other films that you seem to think of that.
Do you think it's got a franchise potential? I mean, they're all signed on for another film.
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's got franchise potential, but the whole thing is a franchise. I mean, the whole thing is just a franchise slice rather than a movie. As far as the classy Ken Branagh moments go, I mean, I thought his flirtatious dinner with Keira Knightley wasn't bad. All that stuff about Lermontov and romantic yearning. That seemed to be the moment in the film where Branagh himself seemed to relax and say, now here's an interesting bit. I'm just going to do a bit of acting. It's talking about how regrets pile up around you like unread books.
Yeah, lovely.
And I thought that was quite a nice moment, actually.
You think this is game, Jack?
They will bring us to our knees without even firing a shot.
There's a very real scenario here where we don't get out of this alive.
We are compromised.
If you find the truth, will you believe it?
Jack Ryan there, ensuring that international exchange rates remain a realistic representation of fiscal status quo. My thanks to Peter Bradshaw and Caspar Llewellyn-Smith. Sam Brooks will be back next week, tanned and refreshed from his Sundance break. See you then.